welcome back to the Tech Girl podcast. Today's conversation is very important and timely. It starts with an important question. Who's missing? What if the biggest flaw in today's AI system that is shaping the world isn't the algorithm, but who was never in the room when the data was built? To help me answer this question, I sat down with Torin Ellis, founder of Ngoma, a company on a mission to center the lived experiences of people with disabilities. He focuses on how AI is designed, trained, and deployed. Torin has spent over a decade in diversity and inclusion, and he made the case that getting this right, that is the data behind all AI systems, isn't just the ethical thing to do, but it's the only smart business move. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome back to the Tech Girl podcast. I'm your host, Gertrude. Today's guest is Torin Ellis, a thought leader working at the intersection of technology, equity, and human experience. Torin is the founder of Ngoma, a company focused on helping organizations build systems that actually work for real people, not just the average user. This conversation will be on fire, and I can't wait for it. Welcome to the Tech Girl podcast, Torin. How are you doing today?
I am wonderful. There are no binaries in culture, emotions, and identities. We are much more complicated than that. One should never, ever remain silent for fear of complexity. Said by Elif Shafak, a Turkish author and essayist. And I absolutely believe that. I believe that we must absolutely reinforce that there is no one-dimensional, two-dimensional, there's no one way to do it. There are a variety of beautiful ways for us to be human. And everything that I do, Gertrude, is about chasing being a better human.
That's amazing. You know what? Side note, I really like that you referenced Alif because last summer or sometime in August, there's this place in Copenhagen. It's all about literature, and actually I got to see them live with the reading and everything at Louisiana Museum. So that's good.
She's beautiful. Yeah. She's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Okay. So you launched Ngoma with a broad premise. Yeah. AI trust is a data problem before a model problem. And most people assume that trust issues in AI are about algorithms themselves. Walk us through the moment when that really crystallized for you and what made you to come up with that statement.
So the first thing that I'll say before I answer that is I'm smiling internally because I pronounce it Ngoma. The G is silent for me. That's the way that I pronounce it. However, because it is Swahili and you know Swahili far better than I do, to hear you say the G, it really causes me a bit of a smile on my side because I'm running around being this ambassador saying it the wrong way. It's a beautiful way, but phonetically I'm saying it the wrong way. That being said, I love Ngoma, and what crystallized for me is there are a couple of things, and if you'll allow me the liberty, let me explain how it unfolded.
Yes.
I would say that I've been doing diversity and inclusion work since 2011. 2019, a report came out from the AI Now Institute describing discriminating systems. And in that report, it was March of 2019 that AI Now Institute released that. And they talked about the absence of marginalized and underrepresented communities. That was March of 2019. Then, January of last year, I released the report, Reducing Bias in HR Using Artificial Intelligence. And the reason, Gertrude, I did that is because I wanted people in the HR community to feel like they had a stake at the table, that they were important in this conversation, that AI-related decisions are not being made with them not being a part of the conversation. It was a moment for me when I started to recognize how much AI could help in terms of reducing bias, that throughout the course of last year, I got to December 7th, literally. It was December 7th, and I said to myself, this is the way that I want Ngoma to show up in the world. I thought that I wanted it to be one way, took a pivot after about 5, 6 months, and I said, this is the best way for us to show up because
Yeah.
this right here is it's defensible, it's fiduciary, it's good for us to be better humans. If we can create AI systems, AI data, AI tools that center the contextual, lived, and vocal experience of people that identify with a disability, if we could do that using that as our centering point, then we would make better systems for every single person touching and using AI deployed.
Yeah, that's very bold of you and noble, I must say. And before we move into the deeper conversation, I'm going to linger on two things as well. So you mentioned that 7th December was when you absolutely conceptualized it. That's actually my birthday. Just putting it out there. Just putting it out there. Um, and then the name. Yeah, let's go back to it because it's a very special name. Did you know that it means drum?
Absolutely. And the
Yeah.
reason I chose it, I've been an entrepreneur for 28 years. I think the first name I wanted for my very first company was Oroko. It's an
Mm-hmm.
African tree.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get it because the domain was taken
It's
back in
taken.
1998. And so I knew that on this particular iteration, it had to be a name that was centered on the continent of Africa and that it
Mm-hmm.
had to mean something to me. I was a
Yeah.
percussionist when I was
Mm-hmm.
growing up, and so I played the drums in church. And so I always feel like we as humans, we are the drumbeat of the organization. And
Mm-hmm.
so it doesn't matter what your product or your service is, doesn't matter. Let me just say it this way, simply put, none of that matters if you don't have the right people in your organization. And those people have to be on a certain frequency. And
Yeah.
so Noma for me is extremely special in terms of name as well
Mm-hmm.
as mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love it for it. I love it that it's African centered. I love it that it's in my tribe and most parts of Zambia where I'm from. Like Ngoma is very popular as a surname as well. Zulu, I believe, also has history with it. So
Awesome.
yeah, great
Awesome.
one.
Yes, thank you.
Um, yeah. Now, your career spans over D&I, you touched on that, HR analytics, AI, and human capital transformation. When did accessibility become a center or central to your work? And how has that reshaped your broader understanding of inclusion?
Yeah, I would say it's become center through the formation of Noma. I
Mm,
became extremely sensitive and aware of the disability community with a bit of precision in an interview that I did with my former podcast partner. Her name is
mm,
Julie
okay.
Sowash. Our podcast back in the day was titled Crazy and the King. Julie is a person who identifies as having a disability. And one day
Mm,
I remember asking her, I said, I'm paraphrasing the conversation, but I remember asking her, well, what jobs can people with disabilities do?
mm,
And her response was all of them. And then just
yeah.
Gertrude caused me to pause for a moment because
Mm,
here in America, I don't know about where you are, but here in America, there's this phrase that I grew up hearing: last hired, first fired. Have you heard that before? Okay,
yes, we have it in Sweden as well.
got it. So I always operated to some degree under that assumption: last hired, African Americans, people of color,
Hmm.
the disenfranchised. There was always a group that was associated with the last hired, first fired. What had never occurred to me was that the disability community is really the last to be hired, if ever.
Mm,
So I know that my conversation, my work over the last 15 or so years in diversity and inclusion has always included those from the disability community. It became a bit more precise in that exchange with Julie back in 2021 or 22, something like that. And then, of course, it became central as I did the pivot for Ngoma back in December 7th of 2025.
Yeah, great. That's true. And most times, when it comes to disability and accessibility, it's usually like a compliance check.
Absolutely.
Still, yeah, which is unfortunate, I must say.
And that's part of the beauty of what I'm trying to do when I talk about that frequency, when I talk about the drumbeat. You see me sway to my left and to my right. It's really not theatrics. It's really how I feel when I talk about building high performing and inclusive teams, when I talk about representation and belonging, when I speak on the power of what Noma is and what we are doing and the industries that we hope to impact. It must be central. It must be core to an individual that you see the work that we are doing here as not only a shift in your mindset, but also a bit of behavior modification. You get in touch with Noma, or you understand what it is that we are doing. It must compel you to say, I've got to do something different. I need to explore what this solution looks like as it relates to our technology stack, or as it relates to our assistive technology or mobility, or as it relates to our decision making in insurance or healthcare and finance. I just want people to understand that Noma, it really is about that drumbeat of humanity. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll ask the question, what must I do to be a better human?
Yeah, definitely. We should all be asking that question. Because the world is pretty funny lately, and it's almost like the human part is being pushed and pushed further away when it should be the centerpiece. Anyway, there's a lot of debate about ethical AI and efficient AI. Where do you see the biggest disconnect between the premise of AI and the lived experience of disabled users?
So the biggest piece for me right now is their exclusion. There's something called abstention ability. And
Okay.
abstention ability is, how do you get the LLM to not guess on a response? And one of the things that I've experienced over the last couple of years of using the various GPTs, I'm not going to mention them, but using a variety of GPTs, is that they typically, or they tend to want to make you feel good. That's not a bad thing, but that is a part of the hallucination that can take place. And so when I talk about abstention ability, actually, I like to focus on, let me just read to you, there's some research. It's titled, Do LLMs Know When to Not Answer? Investigating Abstention Abilities of Large Language Models. It came out in January 2025. I'll make sure to send it to you so that you can include it in the show notes. But
Absolutely.
essentially, what they are saying inside of that research paper is that the LLMs really don't know how to respond accurately as it relates to disenfranchised, marginalized, non-normative populations, communities. That would include people and persons with a disability. Why is that problematic? That's problematic because when we start to look at hiring decisions and the bias that it shows up there, when we start to look at image generation, when you ask one of the LLMs to portray a picture or an image of a person with a disability in a leadership capacity, more often than not, it's not able to really do that because the LLM has not been trained to show people that identify as having a disability in leadership. When you think about healthcare or insurance decisions that these systems are making, they often get it wrong because, again, they are being trained on data that doesn't include the contextual, lived, and vocal experience of persons with a disability. I could go on and on and on, from driverless cars to other technologies that you and I enjoy today. The problem with that is that we must make sure that we are closing the gap between the way that we are deploying, purchasing and deploying these AI solutions and tools. We've got to ask a discriminating question, or shall I say a discerning question around how was this system trained, and who was in the room as a part of that training, and who's going to be held accountable when the system goes awry, and what do we do to recalibrate when we see that the system is not necessarily responding in the way that we'd like for it to respond. And so inside of that research that I'll share with you, they do talk about, Gertrude, chain of thought prompting. And chain of thought prompting is when you really focus on giving the LLM explicit direction as to how it should operate and respond. And you also give it explicit direction on what it should abstain from doing, which is the hallucination, which is the guessing, the hypothesizing. You want the system to come back the right way. And the final thing that I'll say to that is this. They found in the research of the LLMs that the larger LLMs probably had more resources and were able to do this a little bit better. And they still failed, but they were able to do it a little bit better than some of the smaller LLMs. And it's the smaller that I'm focusing on, because a lot of these organizations, HR tech companies, work tech companies, some of our Fortune whatever players, they are pulling their data from smaller, more niche LLMs and not necessarily the larger LLMs.
Definitely. And we will also get into that, because you provide a very good example on the article that you wrote on Substack, and I would like us to go a bit deeper on it. But before we move on, I was just thinking of this thing where disability, like the disability community, is not a monolith, right? And someone who's autistic experiences the world in a very different way compared to someone who's visually impaired or has chronic pain, which is something that you highlighted in your article. How does Ngoma capture, and I hope you don't mind me pronouncing it as Ngoma, not Noma. How does Ngoma actually capture the breadth of lived experiences without flattening it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful question. And the work that we want to do is twofold, and, probably threefold. But the first thing that we'd like to do is have let's just say the largest workforce of persons that identify as having a disability. Even in the examples that you gave, a person who's autistic, there are variations of being autistic. When you talk about a person with a visual impairment, there are variations of what that may look like. And so there are incredible dimensions to identifying as having a disability. What I'd like to have is, inside of our organization, access to a body of work, or persons, if you will, that are across those various dimensions. That's the first thing. And what I want is for the system to be able to capture the data of how they work. How does a person with this particular autism work when it relates to identifying imagery or speech diarization or process evaluation, if you will? How does a person with a visual impairment work in addressing some of the very same issues? I want to use the actual work of those individuals, that lived experience, and then be able to put technology around the way that they work. Here's the key. The key, Gertrude, is that we are right now in a position, in a place where we are using synthesized data to develop and train our LLMs that we are using. If we are using synthesized data, and we know that persons with disabilities have already been largely ignored in the original process, what does that suggest that's going to happen as we continue to develop these LLMs. And so what I want to see is that we, one, are actually capturing the data around humans in the loop, and then we are putting technology around actual data and scaling that and not erasing them from the equation. When you hear me talk about scale, when you hear me talk about wrapping technology around it, I am not trying to do that and displace persons with disabilities. I'm trying to keep them in the loop, because as we continue to deploy AI solutions in healthcare and curing cancer and other mental health diseases, and as we look at displacement of work, and whether it be universal basic income or some other form of income for people in Sweden and in the US and in Latin America and in Europe and other places, I want to make sure that no matter what this looks like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, persons with disabilities have not been excluded from the ideation and from the deployment, but that they have been central in our consideration of advancing AI technology.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because as technology keeps growing and expanding, the more that the gap keeps widening, and the people
Absolutely.
that have already been excluded from the beginning, it just keeps getting worse. Before we move on, could you just break down what you mean by synthesized data?
Yeah. So I'm not a technologist, but what we know is that a lot of the LLMs, first and foremost, I don't know exactly when it stopped, but our, let's say, original versions of the GPTs, they were constructed off of all of the books that they could get their hands on, all of the blog posts that they could get their hands on, just anything that lived on the internet, in public libraries, in personal repositories, if you will, anything. That's what the original LLMs have been trained on, and maybe even continue to be trained on. But my understanding of this is that there's no more original data that they are now using. When I say no more original, today we are creating some new data. So the recording that we are doing today is a new form of data that eventually will be ingested into one of the LLMs. I get that. What I'm saying is that these large shops are synthesizing, they are fabricating data. They are using engineers to create hypothetical scenarios. They are using engineers to create hypothetical readings, hypothetical projects, if you will. And so synthesized data is nothing more than, someone's ideation, if you will, because of where they think we need to go. And so that is the reason why evals and, process orientation and process evaluation is extremely important. And again, understanding the provenance and being able to put your finger on, well, why did we get to this decision right here? That, of course, to me is the reason why Ngoma is extremely important. When you go and ask an organization, how did you train the system? I'm willing to bet 9 out of 10, probably 9.5 out of 10, they won't be able to say how much of a population from the disability community was included in the data set. And that's the reason why it's important. And so I don't want, if we've already run out of real data and persons with disabilities have been excluded, I don't want us to continue to do this and synthesize what it's like to be autistic, synthesize what it's like to be deaf, synthesize what it's like to have a spinal cord disorder. I don't want us to operate off of that. I want us to use individuals, not use, that's a poor word. I want us to employ and be able to learn from the real experiences of persons that have these various dimensions. That's what I want to enforce.
Mm-hmm. Which is what you're working with and have started doing.
Absolutely.
And pretty evident from your article on Substack. I would say you took a very practical example, and maybe just if you may provide context of that. I'm referring to the first post where you had an image of the Aura Ring, not sponsored, but where you run through a prompt into the different GPTs and the response that you got from that. Maybe you could just, expand on that, your thought process, and in giving that practical use case.
Yeah, I'll do it. Actually, I'll do it exactly for you the same way that I did it on LinkedIn. And basically, what I did was I put an image up to the camera just like this, something very similar to this. And I asked people to describe what they saw. And in that description, you can look at my LinkedIn post and you can read the Substack. But if you look on the LinkedIn post, if you find it on my page, you see people describing what they saw in that quick 5 or 7 seconds that I held it up to the camera. And what I did over on Substack in the post that you mentioned, Gertrude, is I elaborated on how the LLMs evaluated that image. And let me just say, full transparency, I think that the LLMs, for the most part, did a beautiful job, but it did a beautiful job because of the prompt that I placed in. I placed a very specific prompt. Again, going back to that chain of thought, not as detailed as a full chain of thought, but I put in a very specific prompt and I asked the prompt to look at the image and define what that was, if you will, through the lens of a person that identifies with a disability. And so for anyone who reads the post, you'll see that when you are very specific on who you are attempting to include or where the answer or response needs to be, that more often than not, the LLM will respond in a way that addresses that, if you will. And so I just wanted people to understand what they may see as an aura ring is not necessarily seen the same way as a person who experiences hypertension or someone who experiences sensory moments and things that are touching their body become uncomfortable, if you will. And so a person who gets up in the middle of the night, again, it's an aura ring, but that person getting up in the middle of the night may be of a certain age and their sleep is being disrupted because they have to go to the bathroom, if you will. So there's a variety of different things that an image or the ring itself may not necessarily take into consideration. And I wanted to expand people's thinking so that they don't operate and move as averages, if you will. Listen, Gertrude, I'm guilty. We move through life in ways that have been in so many developed and created for us, or it's part of our routine that we don't necessarily stop to think, well, what's it like for other individuals? We don't think about what's it like for children that are running from school because ICE agents are in their parking lot, just simply sitting in their parking lot. We don't have to experience that. And so I just wanted to use my post to give people an opportunity to think about something that they see as common in an uncommon way.
Yeah. And I like that you use that because sometimes when you try and explain these complex concepts or lived experiences to people without the visual interpretation or sort of setting them in the context of what you're trying to bring awareness to, it makes it more clear. Like there's no theoretical explanation that makes it more real than someone coming to an aha moment. Like I remember the first time that I experienced accessibility through the lens of someone that's visually impaired, blind. And I was like, oh, okay. So in my work, now I'm more considerate because that has been implanted in my brain. I keep thinking like, okay, if there's no alternative text or if there's no proper description, how will the screen reader make it consumable for someone that doesn't have the same problem? And yeah, that was really good. And based on that, when you spoke to the different people on a call, what stuck with me is that it revealed how deeply blind spots run, even with well-intentioned people. And sort of what would you say to well-intentioned people that are unaware of their own blind spots?
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw in a phrase that is common to you, something that you stand on. You talk about anomaly detection. And when you talk about anomaly detection, you connect that to adoption rates. And essentially what you are saying is that there should be and are ways for us to sort of see the bumps and the rises or the lows, if you will. And I don't do it as well as you do, but we should be able to determine, when people are experiencing or adopting or using a particular technology inside of the workplace. And I find that to be fascinating because I also believe that we could use that anomaly detection premise as it relates to Ngoma and evaluating work tech systems, HR tech systems. We could use anomaly detection as it relates to the user experience on educational or ed tech platforms or insurance platforms. We could use anomaly detection as it relates to what the experience is like for a person inside of a driverless vehicle, whether you are the person in the driverless vehicle or whether you are the person outside of the driverless vehicle. There are research reports that right now that talk about, some of the driverless vehicles, they struggle with people that are in wheelchairs moving backwards. If I'm in my wheelchair moving forward, that's one thing. The camera sees that and interprets it one way. But if I'm a person who is in my wheelchair and I am going this way, the camera struggles to recognize because they see the person's feet kicking the wheelchair, and to the camera it looks like the person is walking forward, but the person is actually pushing their wheelchair backwards. And so I loved your phrasing around anomaly detection, and I use it and sort of extrapolate it and try to apply it here. That's what I would love to see. I would love to be able to see systems do a better job of recognizing when people are sensitive to non-normative populations, when people are sensitive and aware of disenfranchised groups or marginalized groups or voices or that lived experience. I would love people to be hyper sensitive to just being able to sit around a room and ask one very simple question: who's missing? Just one simple question. Every meeting that we walk into, who's missing? Every single meeting. And we may not be able to get that person that's missing to the room, but the fact that we are asking that question, and I don't mean from a standpoint of, is Gertrude missing from this recording? We know that Gertrude might be busy, or your support person may be busy on another meeting right now in the background. That I recognize. What I'm saying is, out of the three of us, who's missing? Well, I mean, if I were to answer it, I'd say probably a person with a disability. We're having this conversation right now around persons that identify as having a disability, but I don't have a visual one. I don't think that I have an invisible one. I mean, I suffer sometimes with paying attention and staying on task, if you will, but I haven't been diagnosed with a disability. So I think just from looking at our screen, if we were to ask that question, who's missing, it might be a person with a disability that could add some different context and layer to the conversation that Gertrude and Torin are having. So I would just challenge every single person, if you want to close that gap, you've got to be willing to ask the question, who's missing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Makes me think, because even with colors, it's the same thing. If someone asked that question, it would be quite a number of problems solved. Yeah. Well, let's move on. We still have a lot to cover. And I want to make sure that I bring out everything from you. Now, you have framed the whole elimination of the lived human experience as a risk issue and also legal, reputational, and regulatory. Why do you think leading with risk rather than just ethics is more effective way of getting companies to listen?
Well, the first thing that I want to be clear on, the lived experience is not a risk. You may not have meant it that way, but for the
No.
person listening to the recording, I don't want them to walk away thinking that I think that a lived experience is a risk. So that's the first thing. Ethical. I'm just going to be honest with you, Gertrude. I'd like to operate feeling like most people have a good measure of do good, wanting to be good. Um, but what we've seen over the last, several decades, we've seen a number of examples of individuals that are wayward as it relates to doing the right thing. And so organizations tend to respond well or better when you show them the fiscal, fiduciary, risk, regulatory pluses and minuses, if you will. And so the reason why I talk about Ngoma through the frame or through the lens of risk, reputational, and compliance is because I believe that if we are hitting them in ways that are on their balance sheet, hitting them in ways that impact their stakeholders as well as their shareholders, that they'll be more apt, more quick to listen to the power and criticality of what we are doing here at Ngoma. If I center the conversation around ethical and feeling good, if you will, I'm just not confident that that will garner the type of participation that we are looking for and that is necessary. Because again, this isn't feel good work. This really is about making sure that, as these systems get smarter and are more widely deployed, that we are doing everything that we can to protect humanity. So I just know that we need to hit them in a way that makes them respond rather quickly, if you will.
Absolutely. And on that note, yeah, if a product leader or an AI team lead or whoever has that level of responsibility in ensuring that they do it right, and they were listening right now, and they've never thought of doing this work, right? What's the one thing you would say they should stop doing and the one thing they should start doing literally this week?
The one thing that they should stop doing a very good question. Let me just go with the one thing that I think that they should stop doing is making decisions without going through a thorough discovery. I'll go back to my report in January of 2025, Reducing Bias in HR Using Artificial Intelligence. One of the things that stood out in the report, we asked of the respondents, we asked them, when you are purchasing an AI related system or tool, do you ask that vendor how their system or tool will support your D&I efforts? And I just put bias under diversity and inclusion. Overwhelming response was, no, we're not asking that question. So you can assume, Gertrude, that they have a D&I initiative, yet they're not asking how will this tool support our D&I initiative. So I think the one thing that I would encourage people listening to stop doing is shortcutting on their discovery or exploratory period around AI related solutions. The one thing that I would ask that they start doing, and we've already mentioned it, I would just simply say who's missing. And I think that if they ask that particular question, it will help them in positioning themselves to be better informed around what they should stop doing. Because when you bring different voices to the equation, you get different perspectives and you get to see solutions a little bit differently. So stop doing being short-sighted on your discovery and exploration. Start doing, ask the question, who's missing?
Yeah, I like that. What if they challenge it back with time and cost constraints?
Well, I would say that it costs less to get it right upstream before you deploy a solution downstream. It costs less for us to make sure that we are bringing the right technology into our HR tech stack before we deploy it, and we find ourselves operating and experiencing what Workday may be experiencing with their current litigation, what HireVue may be experiencing with their current litigation. Are you familiar with those cases, if you will?
No.
So
I'm familiar with Workday.
I'll use HireVue as an example. They're not a bad vendor. They have HireVue is an interviewing platform, and essentially the litigation right now is that during one of their interviews, they gave feedback to the candidate that the candidate needed to exhibit better listening skills. It's a video interviewing platform, and the system told the candidate that they needed to exhibit better listening skills. The candidate that they gave the feedback to, Gertrude, is deaf.
Mm.
So you may think that it's better to deploy a system without taking it through a process that Ngoma would have taken it through, but it is going to cost them potentially downstream, because now it's deployed and you have litigation, and there may be other people that surface through said litigation. So I just say that for a person who feels like time is not on our side, cost is not on our side, you'll pay the price one way or another.
Yeah, I absolutely like that. Yeah, it's better you do it right the first time, or at least do your best to do it right the first time.
And I was just going to say, do your best. And that doesn't mean that Ngoma is the end all be all. I'm not suggesting that we are 100% or 1000%, because again, there are various dimensions to disability, if you will. There are various dimensions to the lived experience. But I'm just simply saying, try to do your best. And if time and resources will allow you to try to do your best, let's do it that way.
Absolutely. And I like that you brought in the idea of ERGs and DE&I programs in your response previously, because a lot of companies did put in effort into their D&I programs and ensuring that most companies had ERGs, right? And what I'm wondering from that context is, how is Ngoma doing it fundamentally different than just checking the compliance box, which people have made assumptions of that most companies were doing?
Yeah, so certainly it's a little bit different in the sense of ERGs are an internal component to an organization. It was in what I would consider to be a previous life of mine when I was a consultant in the D&I space, and I still do and can show up in that particular capacity. It's just not a focus for me for a variety of reasons, which we will probably not get into. But what I will say, how does Ngoma show up in the sense of supporting ERGs? We support it through the sense of we want to make sure that we have one of the largest workforces of persons that identify as having a disability. And so in that particular regard, organizations that we go in and support, they may have an ERG centered around persons with a disability. There may be some opportunities for us to collaborate with one another. One of the things that I did in my consulting practice is I would always tell the ERG leaders to find a value point in the organization that you can support. that the ERG is not like a treehouse club group meeting, that we are in the business to deliver impact to the business. And so as an ERG, you might have one that supports persons with disability in the organization. And that ERG may say, well, let's team up with Ngoma. Let's help Ngoma identify even more people with disabilities. Maybe we can team up with Ngoma and we can support a particular cause that relates to this community, the disability community, and our particular geography. So there are a variety of ways that we as Ngoma can work with ERGs inside of the organization. It might not even be an ERG for persons with disabilities. It could be an ERG for women, or it could be an ERG that's faith-based, if you will. There are so many ways that we can work with an internal ERG in a way that complements the work that they are doing, as well as impact the bottom line of said organization. And I think that that's the beauty of the work that I bring. I have a rich and deep history. I have extreme acumen as it relates to D&I practices. I don't care what you call it. I don't care what acronym you use. I don't care what geography it's in. I understand how to do diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as good as and better than most. And so I think the beauty that I bring to the equation of forming Ngoma, building, scaling Ngoma, is I can go into any organization, look at what they are doing from a D&I perspective, and immediately find 1, 2, 3 places where we can add value and make impact for stakeholders as well as shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. Before we leave this part of the conversation, I just want to ask one more thing. Accessibility and inclusion are connected, but not identical. How do you define the difference? And do you think it's important and it matters that tech sort of has this differentiation?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think just on the surface, they have two different definitions. Accessibility is one thing, inclusion is something, belonging is something different. So there's certainly a variety of ways for us to look at how that ecosystem comes together. I think that what's extremely important is that people have to be willing to acknowledge that diversity and inclusion is far more than race and gender, that it is socioeconomic, that it is educational, that it is geographical, that it is political, that it is familial. There are so many dimensions to diversity and inclusion. And in all of those dimensions, you need to look at accessibility. What does a person with a graduate degree what access does a person with a graduate degree have that a person with only a high school degree has, that a person with no skilling has? What sort of inclusion or looks like for a person that is or identifies as a woman versus a person who identifies as non-binary versus a person who identifies as male, if you will. So when I think about accessibility and inclusion, yes, they are two very different things, but they are all a part of an ecosystem that, once again, to the top of the call, shows that you are working to be a better human. How do I make it accessible, inclusive, make people feel like they belong? And when I do that and do that in a way that is remarkable, those individuals are going to be far more engaged, far more productive, and they'll stay with my organization longer.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Thank you for sort of bringing it home. Absolutely tells how it should be and how we should be thinking about the whole narrative around diversity and inclusion, because people tend to debate on the semantics and not necessarily the bigger picture of what we're trying to bring home in the organizations. Right. Time flies when you're having fun, but let's talk about the future, right? And looking forward. Building this sort of company that humanity broadly defined as still matters, like centering humanity. Is there a value statement as much as a business one? And how would you protect it as Ngoma grows and the market pressure obviously starts to amount.
Yeah, I go back to something that I've said for, the better part of the last decade. The ROI of DNI is greater humanity. And when I think about where we are as it relates to artificial intelligence, when I think about some of the fear and the trepidation here in the US and certainly in other places around the globe, people wondering whether or not AI is going to take their job, is it going to displace them? When I think about some of the bigger conversations that are now 2, 3 years old in Silicon Valley, where they had betting pools on how fast it would or how long it would be before we had a one person unicorn, a one-person billion-dollar organization. When I think about where some of these people are hoping to take technology, some of the leaders of the large LLMs, when I think about some of the concerns that folks that have worked inside of these large AI related organizations and their fears around agentic solutions and it being able to control conversations, think and act like humans, and all of the other stuff, I just feel like we should stay centered around, the ROI of DNI is greater humanity. And so if we are protecting humanity, we should be thinking about how these solutions are situated in our work and our play. We should be thinking about placing guardrails around these solutions, not just here in the US or in Europe, but all across the globe. We should be thinking about and concerned as it relates to some of the technologies being in the hands of some of our geopolitical leaders. Listen, I'm not smart enough to know which geopolitical leader should and should not have it, but I don't think that we should be shying away from these conversations because truth of the matter is that there are some nefarious people. There are some people who, if they were to get their hands on certain technologies, that they have total disregard for human life. Everyone can't build a bunker. Everyone can't afford to build a bunker. Everyone needs and wants to take care of their family. And so I just think that we should be centered on a premise that says if we continue to include and explore the beauty of diversity, that we will protect humanity.
Yeah, like that. We definitely need to protect humanity. Okay. I'm really excited to see how Ngoma will grow and what happens next and where it goes. But where would you want it to be in, let's say, 5 years? I know right now future feels unpredictable, but where would you like to see it in 5 years?
Yeah, I've already mentioned it a couple of times, but it bears mentioning again. I want us to have the
Mm.
largest workforce of persons that identify as having a disability. I want that to be something that is absolutely global, that we can get projects from organizations in Latin America and that we have folks from Latin America with disability working on those particular projects, that they're not outsourced here in the US, or that it's not mandatory that they be outsourced to teams here in the US, that we can get programs and projects in Asia or in EMEA, if you will. I want us to have a workforce of tens of thousands of persons that identify as having a disability. And 5 years from now, those individuals are still saying to themselves, we have been included, that this is our first time that we feel like we are being not only seen, but heard and valued. That's what I want to see happen with Ngoma over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years.
That's beautiful, amazing. I love it. I love all of it because I'm all for humanity as well, just to
Absolutely.
make it clear. Any final words? Where can people find you? What's next? What to expect? How can people support, engage, all the good stuff?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn at Torin Ellis, Torinellis. I'm sure that'll be in the show notes. You can get more information on Noma at ngoma.io. That's N as in Nancy, GOMA.io. And of course, as you mentioned, Gertrude, I have some articles over on Substack. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. But for the most part, you can find me at Torin Ellis because I control that real estate digitally.
Great. And how can people support? What can everyone that's interested in what you're building, how can we participate?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. So, if you are in AI or machine learning inside of your organization, if you are a decision maker in the C-suite, somebody who deals with compliance, governance, regulatory matters, even if you are a person who is tasked with reputational management inside of education, ed tech organizations, healthcare, life sciences. I want to work inside of finance and insurance. I absolutely want to work inside of HR and work tech solutions, assistive and accessibility technologies. Think driverless cars, think wearable technology. If you can make an introduction inside of your organization to someone who can say yes to Ngoma, that's how you can support the work that we are doing. From a collaboration partner standpoint, we already have partners here in the U.S. that are really ready and willing to provide talent, highlight our opportunities in front of their talent. I'll begin to explore collaboration partners in other geos once we get going. But that's how you can help. You can introduce us to people that can make a decision to say yes inside of your organization. And you only have to ask one simple question. Before we deploy this AI related data, system, or tool, did it include the voice of persons with a disability? And if the answer is no, they need to be talking to us.
Awesome. Yes, please talk to Torin and the team at Ngoma because they're doing amazing stuff. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've enjoyed talking to you. There's many subtopics that I would have loved us to branch into. I hope there'll be another time where we can talk and get into those, but it's been lovely chatting with you. So thank you.
Thank you again. I appreciate you, and I'm rooting for you, for your son, for your family, for your team to have an amazing 2026.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap for one of the most important and timely conversations centering disability in building AI systems. Torin reminded us that inclusion isn't a feeling, it's a system, and systems can be built better. Start with his question, who is missing? I challenge you on that. You can find Torin on LinkedIn. As for the Tech Girl podcast, this is the end. Thank you for listening. Share and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. Goodbye.